Guys, this is going to be a different kind of podcast and an important one because as marketers, all we think about is running more ads and getting more leads every day. And that's not always enough. What you guys have heard is scaling up and through a variety of our content, our expert speakers, is getting more leads is not the only battle. It's just the first one. And then converting them and running a really great practice is the most important one. And we've got Joe Sanok on this podcast, on Ignite, with us here for the next 15 minutes. And the dude knows the business of the business really well. Joe, welcome to Ignite.
Oh, Alex, I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for faking it. So Joe, tell them about where you come from and a little bit about your business.
Yeah, so I'm up here in Traverse City, Michigan, and I started a counseling practice just as a side gig way to pay off student loan debt. Slowly built that into, for our community, which was a larger practice, so 13 practitioners, all private pay. Ended up selling it to one of my practitioners there in 2019. I had concurrently started Practice of the Practice in 2012, and that was a podcast and also a website, really for me to just document my learning. So, learning about SEO, I didn't want to pay a consultant, so I just reach out to someone that knows SEO and interview them and ask all my questions. And if I wanted to update my WordPress website, I'd find a guy or gal that, could help with that, and I'd interview them for the podcast and we'd work on my website. So really, it was just, I didn't know this stuff, and I just started a podcast to be able to interview people I should probably be paying. Over time, now we're over 1,100 episodes. I think you were episode 1171, if my memory serves me. So that's now all I do. I get to interview really interesting people, and in your case, somewhat interesting people, and
marginally
useful people, and do some consulting. We have some consultants, and then we've got a membership community that helps therapists in private practice to thrive, but not just thrive, to make a practice they absolutely love.
I love it. And you built the business and you saw all of the hiccups and issues through building it, and now you're helping others kind of avoid some of those and building a network, a community, so they can get together. You have a number of events I see that you're throwing and stuff like that, and you get the people together. I love that we're not just going to talk marketing on this one. That's good. It gives me my mind a break for a little bit. What is, like, in running these what have you seen most effective in scaling up from a few locations and clinicians beyond that? What are the keys that you preach to your practice clients?
Yeah. So from the very beginning, we just talk about really simplifying the business, because most therapists went into therapy to help people and not to run a business. So if we can just simplify what's going on, I think that just makes it easier. It seems less complex and scary for them. So, really in a practice, there's three major things. There's the operations, there's the clinical, and then there's the marketing. And so if we just say, okay, what are you doing to scale in each of those areas, and how do we continue to scale beyond yourself? So to get to that 100K, when they first start out, you're wearing a million hats. You're the bookkeeper, you're the accountant, you're doing often the billing. And then we want to slowly over time just say, like, what do I hate doing? Okay, I hate answering the phone, or I'm missing the phone calls and people aren't getting scheduled in because I'm in the way of that. Well, let's hire a part-time virtual assistant. And then over time, it's like, let's hire a full-time person. Let's add a couple clinicians. And so really helping them overcome that mindset of only I can do it as well as I can do it, instead of, yeah, you can do it best now, but that doesn't mean that someone else can't do it better than you at some point. And so once we start to overcome some of those mindsets, to me, that's when people start to realize, oh, I really like this aspect of the business. Maybe I don't like doing clinical anymore, and I like the marketing, but I don't like the operations. Okay, let's put you in that area and figure out where your time is best served.
And do you find that every practice owner has their own superpower, and you're like, oh, they actually are really good at marketing. I've got to get them replaced on the ops side first, or is it a kind of general playbook everybody runs?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have areas that they have preference. And so, we'll take some of my clients, they're former IT people that turned into counselors. Like, they love the website stuff. They dork out on that. Now, the problem is we have to think about, is that getting in the way of your growth? So I love art, I love design, I love color schemes and marketing and all that. I used to, with my podcast, do every single show notes, all of the editing, and made beautiful graphics for social media for every episode. So every half-hour interview took 3 hours of my time. Now, I eventually outsourced that, and now I just go do art. I just go paint downstairs. I go do watercolors. And so realizing, just because that's scratching that itch for you doesn't mean it has to be in your business. You can outsource that and just say, I'm just going to do this for fun.
And that applies to any marketer out there. I know you love doing the SEO optimizations yourself, but it doesn't mean you should, because your practice is growing too fast. And go do some watercolor downstairs or something like that to scratch the itch. What have you seen
in the neuroscience? And the neuroscience also supports that when you think about when your best, most creative ideas happen, it's when you're in the shower, it's when you're out for a hike, it's when you're driving with the podcast off, and you let your brain just go past that default mode network and get into a deeper flow state. That's when we have our best ideas. And so even yesterday, I had a podcaster cancel last minute. So I had, an hour to just go do something. I decided to go meditate and to go paint instead of jumping into my email and doing all the things I probably should have been doing. But I restructured. We've been working on restructuring our membership community. It all just dumped out of me after that time. And so the neuroscience supports that slowing down actually helps us get more creative and stronger worth things done.
I could not be more on board. I've already walked I think 3 miles today. Walking is my therapy in the way I think. And so it absolutely is critical to get away from this computer and just go think. And so even if there's that thing that you like doing, got to take a break. And I promise you will solve all of your problems by taking more breaks. We are overscheduled. As a society, we are way overscheduled. The Zoom thing through COVID, actually, this has nothing to do with this podcast. But side note, the Zoom thing through COVID was one of the best, worst things that ever happened, because now we just load everybody up with Zoom, and the work, I'm sure, is getting less creative because everyone's just staring screen all day. Anywho, with your larger practices that you're working with, Joe, what are some of the unlocks that you've seen really help them scale up? What do the big practices do better than the small practices?
Yeah, the owners take trips. I just talked to this lady on the podcast. She has a huge practice. She's been in Europe with her husband for 4 weeks, and they're like, you know what? Let's go to Paris for an extra couple weeks. If you can't leave your business for 4 to 6 weeks, then you are too connected to your business. You've given yourself a job. And so employees only get a week or 2 off because they are essential. The owner of the business needs to move towards being able to take 4 to 6 weeks off without things falling apart.
That means my business sucks, Joe. I never was 4 to 6. I was talking to my wife the other day. I said, I took a 3-week sabbatical a couple years ago, and Joe, I did the best thinking of my life. I felt we really moved the thing forward. And then it's I guess that worked. And now I'm caught on the hamster wheel and can't get off and take a day off, a week off seems just totally crazy. By the way, Joe works 3 days a week, guys. And Joe, you preached a 4-day work week. Yeah. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I wrote this book called Thursday is the New Friday. HarperCollins stood behind it, which was awesome. Yeah, so when we look at the research around the 4-day work week, 32 hours a week is about the break point where productivity ends. When you look at anything beyond that, you're usually doing things that later you have to undo, or it's subpar work. And so when we look at the research studies, and there've been, if you just look in Google Scholar for 4-day work week and say, in the last 2 years, how many studies, there's thousands of studies now that have been done that point to this. You even look at a place like Golden, Colorado. CNN did a huge story about how they, as a city, switched to the 4-day work week. Now, we're talking fire, we're talking ambulance services, we're talking police. They obviously weren't just working Monday through Thursday and then saying, sorry, no ambulances for the weekend. But people were working 32-hour work weeks over 4 days. They found they had less overtime. They found that they had better quality services, and they actually saved money by doing this across the board. And so what we find is then your brain can rest, it can slow down, we can look internally as to what's going on, and then we can use the neuroscience to actually get more done because we're rested and prepared for the week.
I bet it's going to be even more paramount to work shorter weeks or fewer hours now that a lot of work is becoming so, I was going to say mental. It's you've got so much computer work, let's just say it's thinking type work. We're not in farms doing that. I feel like that's probably where it comes from, is we all had to be in the field and there's no replacement for pulling the corn. But now that we have to use our brain so much and we can accomplish so much so quickly, it really seems outdated. We give our teams off half of every Friday, almost all year, but also we don't track when they're online and stuff. I hope that they are taking time off. I agree. I saw those studies. Also in Europe, they've done plenty of studies. Spain loves to not work. My family's from Spain. They love not working.
I love Spain.
The study proved out really that's the best food.
Eating dinner at 11 o'clock at night and then just taking time off in the middle of the day to go just nap, and I love it.
Yeah. It's awesome. It gets so hot, you kind of have to. My family's all getting together next week and we're going to cook Spanish food nonstop. But the 4-day work week, it makes a ton of sense. If we could get our clients on board, we'd be doing that. Let's shift gears to the podcast. So you have the most famous podcast I've ever seen. You and Joe Rogan, number 1 and 2. And with 11 guys, I was 1157 or something
71.
like that. Talk about not feeling special. I wish he never told me that number, but it is that awesome of a podcast. And Joe has seen what has worked for a lot of practice groups. They say, we don't need a podcast that's B2B thing, Joe. That's not true, right?
No, I saw a guy who started a podcast, and I think he had about 200 followers per episode, and he was making $500,000 a year off of it. The niche was how to sell your 8-figure business. So how to sell your 8-figure business. And so who's attracted to listening to that podcast? People that want to sell 8-figure businesses. What's this guy learning in the process of that? How to sell 8-figure businesses. So he positioned himself as a consultant to people that were selling 8-figure businesses. So he read a bunch of negotiation books, and then he took a percentage of every sale, negotiated it up like crazy. He only needed a couple people a year to make the money he wanted to make. So the thing is about podcasts is you can go so hyper niche in an area that maybe you're even new to. Within 50 episodes, you're going to be one of the leading experts in whatever new niche you're in. So the people that are listening to your show, they're into marketing. Okay, great. A lot of people are into marketing. So what's that next layer that we can add to it? What's the next layer of attracting the ideal clients? You can use a podcast to get your ideal clients as your guests. Okay, so one of our strategies is to have people come onto our show that we think would be good sponsors for our show, create those connections, and then to say, okay, would they be a good sponsor? So I don't remember how, Alex, you got booked on the show, but the level that your business plays in regards to people with 500 locations, you wouldn't get the ROI on being a sponsor on our show. And so it's great to meet you. It's cool that we have these connections. You're playing in a different market than a lot of our listeners are playing in. But, if there's someone that's like, yeah, I'm an accountant for private practices, that's someone that would offer good quality content on the show, but then also might be a sponsor. So if you think about a podcast as, am I attracting my ideal client, my ideal listener? Am I attracting, different, ways that I can learn to surround myself with influencers that are doing cool out there? Now I have, 1,100 people I've interviewed that if someone says, hey, do you know someone that does fill in the blank? I have 5 to 10 people that I easily can refer to, which then builds that social capital.
Yeah, social capital. That's a good word for it. And it helps everybody in your potentially network that could become a client. And there are you were telling me on ours that you had a therapist that was live streaming on the podcast therapy sessions.
Yeah, so Esther Perel, she's a pretty famous sex therapist. She wrote Mating in Captivity, she has one of the top TED Talks. She launched a podcast a couple years ago, I think it was during the pandemic, where she does live therapy with couples and gets into some crazy stuff with them. And it's like they sign disclosures, they do all sorts of stuff. And, it positions herself as a therapist, but it also positions her as one of the experts in really unique couples work.
So all of my B2C provider groups, podcasting is not just for B2B. It's not just to meet potential consulting clients and stuff like that. It works on the B2C side. It is part of the influencer game. You can present a really unique angle for your provider group. Obviously, you're going to have to get a number of people involved and on board, but I've heard it. Health systems are doing it. A view from the bed, you can hear from patients on complicated procedural recovery. The podcasting thing works. Joe, you know what I heard? I was watching CNN last night, and they went to a Trump rally, and they asked the Trump supporters, and they were like, how do you get your news? And they said, we know it's not CNN. And so they said, how do you get your news? And they said, Joe Rogan, and they named 5 different Nelk Boys, all podcasts is the new news source. It's where and Joe, another thing, call me crazy if this is not true. I also heard that people are watching podcasts on YouTube. They are watching live podcasts on YouTube, sitting there. It's the newest old medium of the last 10 years. This is this is really blowing up.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that there's still not that many people doing it. When you look at, compared to starting a blog, compared to being active on LinkedIn, compared to even a YouTube channel, it's the best ROI for the audience size compared to the people that are content creating. And so it's still to know how to launch a podcast is so essential. We have free tools over at podcastlaunchschool.com that just walk people through how do you do the basics of a podcast? How do you position yourself? How do you get sponsors? I mean, we do multi-six figures in just sponsorships. And how do you find those people? How do you make sure that you're offering value and going beyond that? Those are all parts of the equation to get to that next level as a podcaster.
Man, we get multiple one figures in sponsorships. So you guys are killing it. Let's talk about the foundation of the podcast. What is the motion? I want to spin up a podcast. What are the core things someone would need to know how to do?
Yeah. I mean, we want to look at just the technical side, having a decent mic. I mean, there's so many just easy mics out there. I think even before we get there, when we're working with our consulting clients, we have done for you podcast launches that we do for people. We talk talk through where do you already have an audience and kind of where's that audience overlapping with what you're just crazy passionate about. There's no point, in my opinion, to starting something to make money that you don't love doing. There's tons of ways to make money. Don't do it in a way that you hate. So starting with, for you, Alex, thinking about if you didn't have this podcast and we were starting from scratch, to think about, okay, you like marketing. You represent, this business. You're doing really big marketing stuff. But like, what in that just could you talk to friends about over beers for hours and you would love it? And so really digging into the things that you absolutely love. That's why every single guest, before we start rolling, I say, are you really passionate about talking about right now? And what are you sick of talking about? Over and over, people are like, you know what? I'm known for this and I'm kind of sick of talking about fill in the blank. But you know what I'm really been dorking out on lately is like AI, for charades with my daughter, not for anything other than that. And it's like, well, let's start there. Let's start with the things, like maybe we'll find how that overlaps with what you're into. So finding that, then working in the formula we use for people that are just starting is to do 5 solo shows. So we're like the 5 pillars of what you're talking about. So say we're talking about email marketing is like the whole thing that you're going to focus the whole podcast on. So what are the 5 pillars of email marketing? Then we want to have 5 episodes that are with experts that are way better known than you are. And so you're positioning yourself as an equal with these experts. So that's immediately then giving social proof. And then doing 5 episodes with your ideal clients. And so doing live case studies on walking through someone's email marketing, for example. So then we have 15 episodes. And at the end of that, you can say, you know what, doing those solo shows was really hard. So for me, solo shows are really difficult. Interview shows, I'm a therapist. Every one of my report cards said Joey talks too much to his neighbors, and now I get paid to talk. And so I know that I can just show up like tomorrow. I have 3 podcast interviews in a row, super easy. So then we know what of those 15 episodes are easy for you. And then let's do more of that if they're resonating with the audience also.
That's a good way to put it. Joey talks too much to us. He still remembers that, Mrs. Goldberg. Take that shit off his report card.
Mrs. Britton, Mrs. Hammers.
We know, oh my God, I should show you a video right now. I have a giant terracotta warrior in my house because Mrs. Goldberg said I would do really on a trip to China thing in 7th grade. And so I went to China and bought a life-size terracotta warrior to say to Mrs. Goldberg.
God.
But you're absolutely right. Like, what is the thing you're passionate about? That is going to be the thing, because you will get drained of this after a few months of interviews that you can't stand, where you have to activate your brain too much. So what are you passionate about? What are they passionate about? And just go and intersect there. And like Joe said, the podcast thing is not super difficult. You can get it done for you by a company like Joe's, or they can guide you and you can build your own flywheel. When you start spinning it up like Joe has, yes, it takes like an army to book enough people, to do the audio, visual, to promote on LinkedIn, to get the content, to get it on the website. But you can start small, and it's a great way to differentiate a practice. Joe, we talked about on your podcast, like differentiation is the name of the game. Tons of therapy groups out there now. You can throw a stone if you're in a city and hit 5 different practices, independent and the big MSOs. You must differentiate the podcast. Showing something different, a different side of your group is so critical, and then it's one angle that will help you stand out. I love it. Going into 2025, Joe, what are you harping on with your clients? Hey, this is going to be the main thing I want you guys to focus on to grow faster.
Yeah, I think, when we're looking at growth, I think understanding AI as a tool, but not the end all. I think too many people that are into AI are relying on it for really crappy copy. I view that as being able to have a initial consultant join you to think through things. So for example, 2 months ago, I asked ChatGPT to do a SWOT analysis of my 5 competitors. So strength, weakness, opportunities, threats, and then to do one of myself, and then find those areas where my competitors were doing better than I was, and to point out to me, what could I improve on? The biggest opportunity that it showed me that we knew, we felt it, we didn't put our finger on it though, was we had way too many offerings. I mean, we do so many different things for people because therapists have a lot of nuanced things, but we didn't have kind of a flagship product. And so then I just had it walk me through, like, of what you see, what's a flagship product that you see that's an opportunity. And so we had all these different memberships based on people's phase of practice. It helped me say, why don't you just put them all together under one umbrella and just call it, one thing, and have it be the memberships all inclusive and just has different tracks. So it can help you start to think differently about the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of your business. But then that's where your team needs to be doing those next phase things, that you can't just fully rely on it. And so I think that's, to me, where we can bring in someone to say, okay, I did ChatGPT. Here's what it said around a marketing analysis. It's a starting point, but now let's bring the humans in to poke holes in it and to do some of the application.
I'm about to go ask it to do a SWOT analysis on my company. That is actually really smart. I've got my offsite with the leadership team for planning for next year in 2 weeks, and that was one of my own. I'm just going to have ChatGPT. That's really smart, and it can call out things that you're like, oh, that was kind of obvious.
years.
It is, like Joe said, it's a tool. It's not the end all be all. And eventually it will. And we're all out of jobs. Let's be honest. Joe will have a job because therapy, human to human, that's all we're going to do because we won't have any other white collar jobs. So we'll just go and sit and talk to Joe about how AI is taking over. But it's a good tool, but it's not the end all be all. I think that's good. And we're not going to be replaced entirely by the robots, but we will be replaced by the humans that understand how to use the robots here over the next few years. So go use the robots. And I think Joe's example is super good. And hopefully the new membership consolidation works. Joe, thank you for joining us on Ignite. It was fun to not just talk about marketing stuff, but the business of healthcare. That was very fun. And we hope that all of these marketers listening will remember, get out of the marketing stuff, go do some watercolor, and you'll be better off next year. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks so much, Alex.